Vladimir Putin will die soon. The Kremlin, at the same time, would like to finish off Ukrainian troops as Donald Trump tried to negotiate a ceasefire. French President Emmanuel Macron, meanwhile, prepares French forces for deployment to Ukraine. So, what is known about the President Zelensky's statement on Putin's death, and how do European troops plan to deter Russia? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has predicted that Russian dictator Vladimir Putin will die soon as his death is deteriorating. Zelenskyy made the prediction in an interview when the Ukrainian leader also called on the US not to bring Russia in from the global political wilderness amid ongoing peace talks aimed to end the war. Quote, "He will die soon, that is a fact, and everything will be over." During Zelenskyy's interview also, the Ukrainian leader pleaded with the United States about the aid for Ukraine not to cave to the Russia's demands. During ongoing peace and ceasefire negotiations, the US has agreed to expand Russia's access to global markets. Quote, "It is very important that America does not help Putin to get out of this global isolation now." Zelenskyy said, "I believe that this is dangerous. This is one of the most dangerous moments," according to President Zelenskyy. Meanwhile, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin called for a transitional administration to be put in place in Ukraine and vowed his army would finish off Ukrainian troops. As Barron's reports, approachment between Washington and Moscow since Trump's return to office and the US leader's threats to stop supporting Ukraine have bolstered Putin's confidence more than 3 years into an offensive. Ukraine fears that it could be forced to accept a final peace deal on terms that are favorable to Moscow if it loses the support of its important allies. The renewed call to decapitate President Zelensky's government was the latest demonstration of Putin's long-standing desire to install a more Moscow-friendly government in Kyiv, according to Barron's. Quote, "We could, of course, discuss with the US, even with European allies, and of course with our partners and friends under the UN, the possibility of establishing a transitional administration in Ukraine. As we know, Russia has been trying to decapitate the Ukrainian government since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but Vladimir Putin failed to do so." At the same time, President France Emmanuel Macron said that a coalition of willing would keep supporting Ukraine in the war against Russia and would help safeguard and peace by sending a reassurance force to Ukrainian soil after the war ends. French President Macron said that contours of that force were still being ironed out and details of what was willing to do were still secret. However, it is an open question what role the United States would play in this mission to support European force stationed in Ukraine. Quote, "We need to accelerate discussions to obtain a ceasefire. We need to accelerate our ability to finance and deliver weapons to prepare plans for the Ukrainian army and the reassurance force," President Macron said. However, after discussions, only UK and France were only countries committed to this idea to send troops. Also, French President Macron said that any European force would not be on the front lines and would not be tasked with monitoring or enforcing ceasefire. That job could fall to UN peacekeepers or other independent monitors, while European troops would be based far away from the front lines to deter Russia. The Europeans would also help Ukraine to train and support the Ukrainian army. Also, French President Emmanuel Macron said that a proposed European armed force for possible deployment in Ukraine could respond to Russian attack if Moscow launched one. Quote, "If there was a generalized aggression against Ukrainian soil, these armies would in fact be under attack. And then it's our usual framework of engagement. Our soldiers, when they are engaged and deployed, are there to react and respond to the decision of the commander-in-chief if they are in a conflict situation to respond to it." Meanwhile, France allows the deployment of European peacekeeping forces in Ukraine away from the front lines. One of the options is deployment along the Dnipro River, according to the Associated Press. One possible option that France insists on is the deployment of significant forces by coalition members in central Ukraine, somewhere along the Dnipro River, far away from the front line. Other possible options include deployment of support forces even farther from the front lines, in the west of Ukraine or in the neighboring country. British officials have said the force could number between 10 and 30,000 troops. At the same time, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is skeptical about the idea of deploying forces to Ukraine, which in strategically important areas of Ukraine after the end of the war could be deployed, and was discussed by the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. However, according to the Italian Prime Minister, the deployment of the guarantee forces in Ukraine may be perceived by Kremlin dictator Putin as provocation. That's why Italy does not support it. Quote, "We need to be careful here. This may be seen to more as a threat," Meloni said. At the same time, the Italian Prime Minister once again recalled that she supports the extension of NATO's fifth article to Ukraine without the country's actual accession to the alliance. Meloni is convinced that this would be simpler and more effective than other options. When asked whether she considers Russia as a long-term threat, Meloni replied that it could be, quote, "But in any case, I believe we have to find a way to be prepared to protect ourselves from any threats that may arise." Meanwhile, The Atlantic published more messages from the scandalous signal chat of top US officials after the Trump administration repeatedly denied that the national security team had posted any classified information there. US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz faced calls to resign after it became known that the editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg was accidentally added to a private group chat in Signal. In this chat, Hegseth, Waltz, Vance, and other senior administration officials discussed upcoming airstrikes on Yemeni Houthis. After The Atlantic's first publication, Hegseth said that no one sent war plans in the group. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard also assured the Senate Intelligence Committee that the messages contained no classified information. However, new screenshots of the messages released in new publication by Atlantic show that Hegseth sent messages with the specific timing and sequence of planned U.S. strikes on the Houthis in Yemen. At the same time, a judge in Washington has ordered Trump's administration officials who had confidential discussions about military operation in Signal chat group to ensure the preservation of all messages, according to the New York Times. Federal U.S. Judge James Bosberg, in the first step in a lawsuit filed after the scandal, ordered National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, head of Pentagon and Director of National Intelligence, Secretary of State Rubio, and Vice President J.D. Vance to ensure the preservation of messages in a Signal chat room that was exposed by accidentally adding a journalist. The order applies to all correspondence between March 11 and 15, when details of military operation against Houthis in Yemen were discussed there. At the same time, Judge Bosberg has not yet announced whether he sees signs of violation of the law in this Signal scandal. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and glory to Ukraine.